What's going on, guys? Agent Jim Shorts coming at you with another video for Yins today. If you guys can't tell from watching any of my previous videos, I love Marvel Comics. I've been a fan for as long as I can remember, and they've always been such a fun escape for me. That being said, I'm familiar with a lot more than just the commonly known characters or the ones who have been portrayed in the MCU. So that's what we're going to talk about today. 5 Marvel comic characters who should get a shot in the MCU. Also, if you enjoyed this or any of my past content I've made, please take a second to like and subscribe. I really appreciate it and it helps the channel grow. And feel free to leave a comment on anyone else you think should be brought into the MCU that I didn't mention today. Without any further ado, let's get to the list. Coming in at number 5 is none other than Kane Parker. As Tom Holland's Spider-Man grows up and develops, I think an abbreviated clone saga could be really cool if done right. If you're unfamiliar with what I'm talking about, in the comics, Peter Parker is cloned by the villain the Jackal. This process leads to a bunch of crazy stories that showed Peter coming into conflict with various versions of himself, aka the clones. And not all of these stories were loved. In the 90s, there was a big run on this concept, and Ben Reilly, a clone of Spider-Man, became Spider-Man in the comics, so Peter Parker could focus on a normal life with Mary Jane. People hated this, and it was really not a big success. That being said, there's one character throughout this story that I always thought was really cool, and that is the character of Kane. Kane was an early attempt to clone Peter Parker, and it didn't go well. He was disfigured and had some rather twisted versions of Spider-Man's powers, including burning a handprint onto people's faces, aka the Mark of Kane. He was also slowly dying of a degenerative disease due to the imperfected cloning process. This saga eventually ended and Kane was basically forgotten after the 90s, and only made a few appearances since then. But in the 2000s, Marvel was doing an event called Spider Island, where everyone in New York got spider powers and were eventually mutating into spider monsters. I know, pretty wild, right? Spider-Man, spider monsters. Someone was really sucking the creative juices that morning. But anyway, Kane was also mutated more by the Jackal and became a hideous spider monster who fought against our beloved Spider-Man. At the end of this story, Spider-Man cures Kane of this spider mutation, and in the process also cures him of his disfigurement and his degenerative disease. This gave him a new lease on life, and he vowed to be better and more like his quote-unquote brother, Peter Parker. He started going by the name Kane Parker and ended up stealing a stealth suit from Spider-Man. He eventually found himself in Houston, Texas, where he would go on to become the hero known as the Scarlet Spider. He has a pretty baller suit in my opinion, and the suit, which he stole from Peter, can also allow him to use an active camo, which basically makes him invisible. In addition to his invisibility suit, he has all the powers you would expect for a Spider-Man, with the addition of organic web shooters and bone claws. All of this makes Kane such an awesome character who could bring a lot of conflict and payoff in the MCU. If I had my way, I'd like to see him teased in the upcoming Spider-Man 3 movie. At number 4, we have John Felipe, aka Fantomex. Fantomex is a mutant who was experimented on and augmented by the Weapon Plus or the Weapon X program. He was abused and mentally scarred by this, similarly to Wolverine, and is dubbed Weapon 13. This tells us that he is 3 test subjects after Wolverine, aka Weapon 10. What makes him so unique is his awesome wit and his ability to make the impossible happen. His powers are really odd, but also really cool. He has an external nervous system that evolved into a sentient techno-organic ship known as EVA. To simplify all these weird abilities, his brain and effective sentience is in this ship EVA. This means he can see via her eyes and control her with his mind whenever he wants to. When he's apart from EVA, he doesn't feel pain and he can shrug off injuries like they were nothing because, again, his nervous system is elsewhere. He can also feel any pain that EVA feels telepathically, regardless of their proximity with each other. If something were to happen to his EVA system, he has a backup nervous system internally, but this system isn't as good and it's limited to the point where he can only see black and white. Outside of his powers, he's also an incredible athlete and is basically James Bond. Why I'm such a fan of his is just how different and cool he is. Take his time on the Uncanny X-Force. He was following Wolverine and was just such a cool presence on the team. I think an X-Men or X-Force movie with Fantomex starring alongside the team, including Wolverine and Deadpool, would be beyond awesome. Like, guys, this is the freaking movie I want. Like, this would be so cool, I just can't even tell you. It would be wild, trust me. To get an idea of who he is, imagine James Bond and Deadpool and that douchey French guy who hits on your girlfriend all had a baby together. It's a pretty amazing combination that really leads to some really cool and great stories. If you're interested in finding out more about him, I'd suggest reading the Uncanny X-Force comics. They're awesome and really show what an incredible movie a team including Fantomex could make. As we fly into the 3rd spot on our list, we find Clayton Cortez. You may say, Agent Jim Shorts, who in God's name is this nobody I've never heard of? He probably isn't as cool as the OGs like the Hulk or Wolverine or whoever. Well, my friends, you're actually a lot wrong there. Clayton Cortez is Weapon H. You might ask, who is Weapon H? Well, he's just a hybrid of Hulk and Wolverine. I mean, that's not really anything special. Yeah, no. Can you think of anything more terrifying? I mean, I don't think I need to explain a lot to make you understand why this is so epic. The one thing you may say is, that sounds kind of OP, which can really get boring if he's just too overpowered. And I totally get where you're coming from, but let me tell you, he's actually super cool and is actually a super compelling character. Clayton was a part of a group of soldiers for hire and was double-crossed by his crew. He ended up being sold as a human test subject to the Weapon X program, where they did horrible experiments and ended up turning him into Weapon H against his will. His wife and family were all told that he was killed in action, so he was considered dead by all who cared about him, so no one even thought to look for him. This leads to the tragic story that really pulls on your heartstrings. It keeps you on the edge of your seat and feeling for his poor wife, who was left to deal with all of this suffering. And let me say, she is far more than a damsel in distress. She's the badass who doesn't take shit from anyone. Clayton and his wife make a really good team, and it's really cool to see their story go down. I think just a movie of the initial comic run of Clayton would be awesome. Not knowing where he came from and slowly piecing his life back together could be really cool to explore on screen. I think it could also be really interesting if we don't know if he's the hero or the villain of the movie. If you want to learn more about Weapon H, check out his own comic series by the same name. Coming in at number 2 on our list is none other than the Superman of the Marvel Comics, the Sentry. Now, a lot of you might be saying, Agent Jim Shorts, this is literally just Marvel's version of Superman. Why would we want this lame thing in the MCU? And in many ways, I may agree with you. But the thing is, this Superman is a bit more interesting than his DC counterpart. The Sentry is an all-powerful being with the abilities you would expect: flight, super strength, and vulnerability, as well as many other abilities like telepathy and just other crazy powers. Basically, he has all the powers and is so badass. Spider-Man has even recalled that the Sentry fought Galactus to a stalemate. That's right, the Sentry is on the same level as a guy who eats planets. Pretty gnarly if you ask me. His powers are said to come from the Super Soldier program and is supposedly 100,000 times stronger than Captain America. All this may sound great, right? He's just the badass of badasses who fights for truth, justice, and the American way. Well, that's half true. The other half comes in the part that makes this character really interesting: the Void. The Sentry has a deep, dark secret. He's not just your mild-mannered Superman, he's actually Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And when all hell breaks loose, you're royally f***ed. The Void is a split personality within the Sentry and can shapeshift and do basically everything the Sentry can and more. At one point, he made Thor look like a little bitch and basically destroyed New Asgard. This is obviously a problem and makes trusting the Sentry a very tumultuous endeavor. The split really shows the humanity in all of us and each person's propensity for good and evil. Why I think this character would make an awesome movie is my love for his initial introduction into the comics. When we first meet the Sentry, he's just Robert Reynolds, an overweight nobody living in America. He randomly starts to remember that, wait, he's the Sentry, the greatest hero of all time. Then he remembers his arch nemesis, the Void, is coming to attack the world. Because of the impending danger, he then goes out to seek heroes who start to remember him as he introduces himself to them. As the story progresses, it turns out that he is the Void, and when this happened the last time, he decided to wipe out the memories of himself from everyone in the world, even himself, to protect the world from the Void. Think of what an awesome movie that could be. People don't know who the Void is, and at the end of the movie it turns out it was him all along. That would be a pretty wild twist. It'd be Shyamalanian if I do say so myself. And here we are, number 1. My number 1 person I want to see in the MCU, and that is none other than Agent Venom. Agent Venom is our boy Flash Thompson, who we've met in various other Spider-Man movies. This includes Homecoming and Far From Home. My issue with this is, I'm not sure if the character they cast as Flash Thompson for the MCU can handle this transition. In the comics, Flash is a high school football star who bullies Peter Parker but loves Spider-Man. In college, he eventually befriends Peter Parker and is inspired by Spider-Man to join the military. He eventually becomes a war hero, but later he has his legs blown off by an explosion while he was in combat. This leaves him in a dark depression and on the border of suicide. Out of the blue, he's contacted by the US government with a chance to be a hero again. Imagining this as his chance to become Captain America, or better yet Spider-Man, he jumps at the opportunity. But his optimism is immediately met with a dash of reality when he's finally shown what his opportunity is. The US government has captured the Venom symbiote and has it heavily sedated. They can keep it sedated for 24 hours. During that time, Flash can use the suit to regain the use of his legs and gain the powers of Spider-Man. But there is a big catch. If he takes longer than 24 hours to complete his missions, the suit will bond with him and take control of his body. The government has implanted a bomb in the suit, and if Flash goes over 24 hours, they will detonate the bomb, killing both Flash and the symbiote. This leads to some amazingly tense storylines that could really play well on the big screen, or better yet, a Marvel TV series. The character has so many layers and awesome storylines that the MCU could really tell well. Going back to the beginning of this number, I do have an issue. The actor that cast as Flash in the MCU is far from a football star, and even further from a kid who would join the military. He's being portrayed as a preppy rich kid, and I just don't see that version of Flash Thompson really fitting into this Agent Venom character mold. That being said, Marvel and Disney have come up with some really cool reinterpretations of characters in the past, so if the MCU can find a way to make this preppy kid work as Agent Venom, sign me up right freaking now. This is one of my favorite characters and I'd love to see it. If you're really interested in this character, I'd check out his initial run of Agent Venom comics. And that is the end of our video. As always, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you have anyone you think I left out of this video, or topics you'd like to see covered in future videos, feel free to leave those thoughts in the comments. Anyways, thanks again guys, and as always, stay frosty.